Welcome to the Aerospace Advantage podcast, brought to you by PenFed. I'm your host, Heather Lucky Penney. Here on the Aerospace Advantage, we speak with leaders in the DoD, industry, and other subject matter experts to explore the intersection of strategy, operational concepts, technology, and policy when it comes to air and space power. Remotely piloted aircraft. Combatant commanders can't get enough of them. They're one of the Air Force's most requested capabilities, and the reason is simple. These uncrewed systems provide persistence and presence unlike any other airborne platform. During the global war on terror, the MQ-1 Predator, and subsequently the MQ-9 Reaper, developed into a 21st century military icon, inspiring movies and books and sparking an important conversation on the continued evolution of fighting remotely. And the RQ-4 Global Hawk was right there too. While the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq may now be in the rearview mirror, airmen continue to fly RPAs 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, across the globe. Again, the reason is simple. People still need what these aircraft bring to the fight. The focus on threats like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea significantly changes the narrative for remotely piloted aircraft. MQ-9s and RQ-4s weren't designed to penetrate enemy threat rings. We'll still use them, but in different parts of the battle space. Because when it comes to going downtown, the Air Force will lean on penetrating unmanned aircraft like the RQ-170 and the Collaborative Combat Aircraft, or CCA for short. But guess what? While it's interesting to look into the future, it's important to recognize the vector will be informed by those who have been in unmanned space for decades. RPA pilots will play an important role in defining the relationship between operator and machine. I mean, let's call this one for what it is. RPA pilots have the most experience fighting remotely, understanding the challenges and opportunities afforded by data links, and how autonomy might best fit into the mix. So today we're going to mix it up a little bit because co-hosting with me will be Mitchell Institute's very own Houston Slider Cantwell. So as a 3-time RPA commander, he brings a really well-informed perspective to today's conversation. So Slider, thanks for being here.
Hey, Lucky, thanks so much. I am glad to be here to highlight these amazing airmen and their folks. I'm most excited for you to meet these top RPA pilots and leaders. I've crossed paths with them over the years, and we've been through a lot together. So, without further ado, from the Air Staff, we're happy to welcome Brigadier General Reggie Hammond, Director, RPA and Airborne ISR Capabilities. Sir, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Slider. Lucky, thanks for the invitation here to join you in the studio. Great to be a part of the team here as we join the two wing commanders I know you'll introduce here. I've known them for a while, and they've done some great work over the past couple of years.
Next, Grand Forks Air Force Base flies the venerable RQ-4 Global Hawk. Representing that community is the 319th Reconnaissance Wing Commander, Col Timothy Tilt Monroe.
Slider, Lucky, thanks for the invitation to participate in today's discussion, and it's certainly great to be with two individuals that I hold in very high regard, General Hammond and Colonel Pederson. Looking forward to the discussion.
Finally, we're excited to have the commander of the mother of all RPA wings, the place where it all started, originally at Indian Springs Auxiliary Airfield, now properly titled Creech Air Force Base, the 432nd Wing Commander, Col Nicholas Fever Pederson.
Lucky Slider, thank you for the invitation to join the podcast. I'm always excited to talk about the RPA Enterprise and specifically about how the men and women of the 432nd Wing are contributing to national defense. I welcome the opportunity to share with your audience the amazing work that the hunters accomplish every single day, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak on their behalf.
Hey, Slider, I am so grateful that you're bringing everyone here today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks. Okay, so General Hammond, Reggie, help us set the stage for this conversation. Even though the United States has pulled out of Afghanistan, we've pulled out of Iraq, the RPA community is as busy as ever. Can you give us some idea as to how we're supporting national security every day?
Yeah, definitely, Slider. Thanks. Unlike Fever and Tilt here in this podcast, I don't have an RPA background other than some integration at the weapons school or downrange. So it's not until I got into this position where I really got exposed to the RPA Enterprise, and it is truly impressive, everything they do day in, day out across the globe. You know, when Chief Alvin said we need more Air Force, no doubt we do, and specifically the reconnaissance platforms. And for today's podcast and discussion, we're specifically talking about the unmanned variants. With the largest rated population, 2,200 plus pilots and combat system operators out there, and close to 1,700 sensor operators, our RPAs are flying the globe 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The sun does not set on the RPA Enterprise. And for the last 2 decades, the U.S. Air Force has delivered on the promise to provide near continuous, persistent coverage of hotspots, namely in Central Command. However, you've seen increased presence in AFRICOM, EUCOM, and INDOPACOM. And of course, domestically, we have total force capabilities to support state missions as required by our nations. But RPAs have proven to be a cost-effective and operationally necessary option for our national commanders to employ military capabilities across joint tasks and missions. Through a myriad of sensors, remote aircraft provide the eyes and ears to contribute to, and in many cases, close dynamic kill chains against some of the most difficult of targets. I foresee this trend continuing as we're seeing on our modern battlefields in Israel and Ukraine, that not only our allies' use of RPAs, but also adversaries. And so I continue to see RPAs being a complementary capability to our manned and autonomous capability that will continue to be an important part of our future Air Force.
So, Reggie, thank you for that, because what the RPA community brings to the Air Force as well as joint force operations is absolutely essential. We've seen your value proposition play out time and time again. The persistence, the reconnaissance, the intelligence, how you're able to really track and provide that pattern of life and then do kind of precision attack. You're right. That's something that we need more of and is going to be absolutely integral to future operations for the Air Force. So, Tilt, I'm wondering if you can talk to us specifically about how the 319th Reconnaissance Wing at Grand Forks, how are you all supporting COCOMs around the world? I mean, as Reggie said, the sun doesn't set on RP operations. You are around the globe day and night all the time.
Well, Lucky, it's a privilege to share on behalf of the 319th Reconnaissance Wing. We call ourselves Griffins. And the Global Hawk mission, the RQ-4 Global Hawk, which is a high-altitude, persistent reconnaissance platform, is distributed around the globe. While we conduct a lot of our mission control element operations from Grand Forks Air Force Base, we've got operational units in the Pacific and in the European theater. So let me start with what's happening in the Pacific theater. During the normal season, we're operating from Andersen Air Force Base on the island of Guam. And we're really thankful to operate a really great platform that's got the legs to get up into the sensitive airspace locations that we operate in and through in the Pacific theater. The Global Hawk carries a couple of critical capabilities with it. One is a synthetic aperture radar, which allows us to look through weather. So it's an all-weather capability, allows us to map and collect information on the ground and in a maritime environment. And then the second capability is moving target indicator, which allows us to keep track of things like trucks and vehicles to maritime surface vessels. And so the Global Hawk has significant game in the Pacific theater. And it's because of that synthetic aperture radar and the moving target indicator that we are in incredibly high demand, because every single time one of our airplanes operates in the Pacific, it is getting after a critical intelligence or reconnaissance requirement for the INDOPACOM commander or the PACAF commander. And then most recently, just in the last 18 months, we've started to take what is a very, very large unmanned system. The wingspan of the Global Hawk is pretty comparable to a 737 commercial air carrier. But we've been able to take that airplane and start to do agile combat employment with it across the Pacific to some pretty sensitive places where we're trying to build partnership, strengthen partnership, or just demonstrate that we have the ability to pick up and move and do things in a very agile manner with a very large, complicated platform. Shifting to the European theater, while the capabilities of the airplane are exactly the same, we're supporting intelligence collection requirements for U.S. European Command, Central Command, and Africa Command. And in all three of those geographic combatant commands, we've flown some or a lot in the last 12 months. All of those environments are very different from one another. What we're trying to do in collecting intelligence and exploiting capabilities of potential adversaries or actual adversaries are all very different from one another. But again, the Global Hawk has significant play in what we're doing in the European theater, most specifically, and across the globe back to the Pacific theater. And then most importantly, I think for where we are right now, recording this spring of 2025, as of this week, we have now started to fly operational support sorties in support of U.S. NORTHCOM. That's a significant change of business for us, one we're extremely proud of, but it's also, as I think we'll get to later in our discussion, prioritizing the homeland. And that's a big deal for us to be part of the team that's executing those missions in defense of the homeland.
Well, I think it just goes to show, Colonel Monroe, how important the RQ-4 is to our nation's Air Force and national security options, right? I mean, the combination of aerodynamic performance from altitude, speed, duration, with the sensors and the connectivity that the RQ-4 has is crucial. So what they're doing with NORTHCOM, what you're doing in Europe, and also then specifically what you're doing in PACOM, right? When you talked about the moving target indicator, the SAR capabilities that you have, that is essential towards understanding what the order of battle is, tracking friendlies and unknowns and hostiles, and being able to feed that not only into the intelligence machine, but also into the operations machine. That's it just goes to show we need to have more RPAs. So switching a little bit, I'd like to move over to Fever and the MQ-9 Enterprise, another platform that like our nation just needs more of, right? Can you give us an update on the 432nd and how it's evolving and what you're contributing to today's fight?
Absolutely. So I think the biggest change for the 432nd Wing and the MQ-9 community over the last few years is we are no longer just a counterterrorism platform. In your intro, you mentioned our kind of history in that realm, and we can still do that mission. We have, however, expanded into great power competition with aircraft operating in Europe and the Indo-Pacific on a daily basis. So this expansion into new theaters means that the 432nd continues to see a huge demand signal for our capabilities. We continue to fly combat lines 24/7, 365, and the hunters are operating all around the world. There's not very many Air Force wings that can say that they're flying in 4 different theaters every single day. And we're one of them, and I think Grand Forks is probably one of the other few that can do that. But despite the constant demands of operations around the world, the wing is also innovating and evolving. So we recently introduced automatic takeoff and landing capability, which means we no longer have to deploy aircrew to take off and land the aircraft. We do that from our units here in the United States. This has made the MQ-9 much more agile and reduces our downrange footprint. It also means we've been able to remission 2 launch and recovery squadrons and turn them into 2 MQ-9 combat squadrons, which helps with the demand because we have more aviators able to perform those missions. So with the new missions, new theaters, and healthier kind of personnel levels, we've also focused on strengthening our training mission here at Creech. So we've instituted the first ever MQ-9 flying hour program, and we've increased our participation in high-end exercises like Red Flag and Bamboo Eagle. We've also practiced ACE operations, both Agile combat operations, both here in CONUS around the United States to participate in some of these exercises, but also downrange in some of our deployed units as well. So it's an exciting time to be part of the MQ-9 community. We're definitely, the rumors of our demise were greatly exaggerated because we've definitely found a niche here in competition, and we're proving that we're not just that counter-BEO, counter-terrorism platform.
Awesome. Thanks, Fever. That's a great recap. One thing that you all didn't mention, because we just haven't gotten to it yet, is the challenges as leaders, as commanders that you face leading the unique operation that is RPA. What I want to get at is, in both cases at Grand Forks and at Creech, you have your preponderance of your airmen are living here in the continental United States with small footprints forward, but you're flying 24/7, 365 days a year from your operational bases here in the United States. That is quite a responsibility to keep up with. And it's tough on your airmen. I remember when I was a 732nd Ops Group commander that it can be a grind, having to work shift work, 24/7 operations, 5 days on, 3 days off, 6 days on, 2 days off, whatever it may be. What kind of stress is that putting on your airmen, and how do you all balance that as commanders?
Well, I can kick off for the two of us, but the interesting thing about the Global Hawk is that there are some stark differences in the battle rhythm that Colonel Pederson's going to talk to with the MQ-9 Enterprise. One of the most significant differences is the fact that we're flying a very small fleet. We have 9 airplanes total, and those airplanes are spread around the world. And so that poses a couple of interesting challenges for us. The first, to the root question, which is the battle rhythm of the individuals that are flying it, we do have a bit more flexibility as to when we fly the sorties that we're obligated to perform for the joint force. And because of that flexibility, we're able to manage some of the stressors on our airmen a bit more empathetically, and that affords us the chance to give them the home life that they need, the training time that they need, the downtime that they require. It is a bit harder on our forward deployed personnel because they have to keep the airplanes ready to go. They have to be able to launch at a moment's notice. Both Colonel Pederson and myself have highlighted the importance of agile combat employment. So we're taking people who are, in some cases, already forward deployed. And then when those taskings come from a geographic combatant command, we're deploying them further, which is pushing the human weapons system and that stress inoculation level higher and higher with the more complex taskings that we give them. And then from the maintenance perspective, the good news story is with the way that we're able to manage our flying schedule, we can give people the downtime that they need, the training time that they need, but we also have the ability to very delicately manage the maintainability and sustainability of our weapon systems, because aircraft availability across the Air Force, with the Air Force being as small as it is and with fewer and fewer platforms to fly, keeping them healthy is a really, really difficult challenge. And so we try and manage those things all in concert with one another and in complement with one another to get the maximum effect of the personnel and the weapons system.
Awesome. Slider, I really appreciate that question. And I think it comes from the fact that you were an operations group commander and a wing commander in the RPA community. But you're right. We do not have the stress of deployments and being away from families. But what we have is the 24/7, 365 nature of our mission, where our crews are on shift work. They'll be on that shift for about 10 weeks at a time, and they're going to be responsible for up to 8 hours of flight time every single workday. And they work a 5-1-2, so 5 days where they're responsible for flying, 1 day where they're on call and they do appointments and things like that, and then 2 dedicated days off. And after 10 weeks on like a day shift or a swing shift, they're going to rotate to the next shift. And after 10 weeks, they're going to rotate to the next shift. And it's just a kind of continuous grind. The good news is it's gotten a lot better than where we were even like 3-4 years ago. And the reason why is because the Air Force recognized some of these challenges and some of the stressors that they were placing on the community, and they helped with increased personnel levels. And so we've gotten a lot healthier on the number of folks that we have, and then increased resources for our airmen, including dedicated team members who are there to kind of help alleviate some of that stress in the form of our chaplains and flight docs and aerospace physiologists. So things like that have really, really helped improve the stress level that our crews are facing. And the fact that we are healthier on our personnel levels means there is some downtime associated where they're able to get out and participate in some of these exercises and things like that. So I'm really excited to see where we've come over the last 3 to 4 years. And I think it's just going to get better in the future as we remission some of those additional squadrons.
Yeah, Fever, thanks so much for that. The quick vignette I like to share with folks when they ask me about being an RPA pilot. They say, oh, isn't that weird, having to go fire Hellfire missiles and be in combat 1 minute, and then you're at a soccer game on your way home, or you stop by the supermarket. And I say, well, that's only 1/3 of the schedule, because you're only on day shift 1/3 of your time at Creech. So 1/3 of the time, you actually get home at 1 o'clock in the morning. And the chances of your kid playing a soccer game at 1 o'clock in the morning are 0. And then the other 1/3 of the time, you're getting home at 10 o'clock in the morning after being up all night. And your desire to go to a soccer game at that point is about 0 because you're so exhausted. And so I saw that in my folks when I was at Creech, how tired folks got because you had to adjust your circadian rhythm 8 hours every month or
Yeah,
two.
I mean, at that point, you're dealing with personnel that have chronic exhaustion plus combat stresses without the necessary sort of like decompression or the ability to, when you're deployed over in bad guy land, I mean, there's a level of decompression that occurs because everyone is sharing the same experience. But you don't get to come home from the sortie and share that same experience. You're going home. And like you said, I mean, because of that cycle, you're constantly exhausting yourself.
PenFed checking and savings accounts are here for all your adventures. From
Do you take this man to be your husband?
I do.
to
He has your eyes.
He's perfect.
learn more at penfed.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
So one thing I'd like to pick out, Colonel Monroe, was you mentioned with the RQ4 what you're already doing for ACE operations. And Colonel Pederson, you mentioned that you're doing this as well with the MQ-9. Can you talk a little bit more about how you're actually implementing ACE and how you expect those lessons learned to transfer over to the burgeoning CCA or Collaborative Combat Aircraft world? Because they envision that they'll be doing ACE operations as well. Obviously, it's Collaborative Combat Aircraft doesn't have the same missions or personnel and so forth, but I assume that there has to be some similarities and crossover that they would be taking your lessons learned.
Fever, you want to kick that one off?
Absolutely. So I can't really speak too much on to CCAs. I think that we're a little ahead of the game on there, but I can talk to you a little bit about our ACE operations that we've been conducting here, both here in the United States as part of exercises like Bamboo Eagle, where we have sent a small maintenance footprint forward to basically recover aircraft and turn them, refuel them as part of these larger Bamboo Eagle and Red Flag type of exercises. I can also point out one of the challenges in the MQ-9 is you usually have a main operating base that you are kind of tied to. And when you get to areas like the Indo-Pacific, the tyranny of geography is really, really challenging to overcome. And so if we're tied to our operating location, and it takes us 8 hours to transit to wherever the combatant commander needs us to be, that's 8 hours there, 8 hours back that I'm not providing collection or intelligence on the things that they want me to, and I'm losing that time, that mission time. And so what we've done is we've aced in that theater to, for example, the Korean Peninsula. We don't have an MQ-9 main operating base on the Korean Peninsula, but we aced there as part of an exercise, Korean flying training, which is the largest exercise between the Republic of Korea and the United States. And we were able to bring an MQ-9 there, send a small maintenance team forward, and then operate out of there for a week before returning back to the main operating base. And so what it allowed us to do, instead of spending the time to transit to Korea, we were just right there and we could participate in these exercises on the full mission capabilities as opposed to a limited basis. And so that is where we have been using ACE in the MQ-9, both here in the United States and overseas at deployed locations, to kind of increase our capabilities and to get after some of that demand signal that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, that's great that you're cutting down on the drone time, haha, if you will. Dad joke. But in terms of actually executing tilt, any lessons learned that you think can be pushed forward?
Yeah, for our community, we spend a lot of time talking about access, basing, and overflight. Colonel Pederson brings up a really important point about operations in the Pacific, and it's just for a person who has not been there before, it's wrapping your mind around just how massive an expanse you have to cover. The great part about Agile combat employment as a scheme of maneuver is that while it is primarily about providing an asymmetric opportunity to combatant commanders to sustain forces in the fight, it's also teaching us some really difficult lessons about where we go, why we go there, and how you sustain things once you get there. And so let me unpackage that just a little bit. When we choose the places that we're going to go and execute our Agile combat employment, for now, some of them are just simply based off of building partnerships in the region that we're operating. So if we're going to do an ACE event to a country that we have an alliance with or a friendly relationship with, that right now is one of several reasons that we're choosing to go there. But what we're trying to do is build out a web of places that you can go and operate. And the more you build that web, the more complicated the problem is for how you get an airplane there, how you get personnel there, and what you do while you're in that space for a period of time in between these pulses, as we're now calling them, that are going to eventually move forward into potential places of inflection or conflict. And so getting to those locations is one piece. Once you get there, you've got to make sure that you have the infrastructure. And we, in the RPA business, we talk a lot about the importance of the airmen that operate, fly, and fix the airplanes, but also the importance of the infrastructure that we rely on. The MQ-9 has a bit more robustness to handle airfields that are perhaps less prepared than what the Global Hawk can do, because the Global Hawk is a highly automated, remotely piloted aircraft. And so thinking through the infrastructure before you choose where you're going to go is really important. And then with all of our partners, regardless of the theater that we're operating in, everybody has a slightly different perspective and perception about remotely piloted aircraft, which adds a very complex relationship with who's welcoming them in airspace and how you get there safely, how you do that with host nation sensitivities and respecting what that host nation is able to provide and wants to provide to U.S. and coalition partners. And we try to wrap all that stuff together in the experience of agile combat employment and then put it in the hands of really young people, young airmen, to go out there and exercise these things, learn about it, reflect on it, and then create lessons learned that they pass up their respective chain of command that eventually influence policy, relationship, and expectation management from the highest echelons of our nation's Air Force.
You know, it's interesting. I hadn't even thought about the overflight or the through flight or just the use of airspace while you conduct ACE operations. But that's a challenge for us, even just domestically within the national airspace transportation system, is how to fly RPAs to and from the home drone to the practice area or even just outside. So that's an interesting problem set that I hadn't even really thought about.
Yeah, lucky when I was flying the RQ-4, the one thing I loved about it over the MQ-9 was that once you got above 50,000 feet,
no one cared.
It was pretty much easy to go wherever the heck you wanted.
Yeah.
So, and there's no thunderstorms up there, so it was amazing. Really easy for the old guy to fly that one. Awesome. Hey, tremendous.
It would be helpful, though, if I may, to get General Hammond's perspective on that, because the relationship with the Federal Aviation Administration is a critical relationship, not just to defense of the homeland and how we conduct operations domestically, but the things that we learn and we experience end up spreading into relationships across the globe. And he's got a front row seat to that relationship with the FAA.
Yeah, the FAA, we've been doing some great work in our relationship with the FAA. That's here at the Air Staff, other units out there, organizations, and have really moved the chains forward with regards to RPAs operating in the national airspace here recently. This past January, we started a new trial program through the FAA called File and Fly. Nothing cosmic there, but it enables an RPA to file a flight plan and operate in the national airspace just as a manned aircraft would. And so we went through that first phase. It just concluded a couple of weeks ago. Very successful. And now we're going into second phase, which now allows an RPA to file a flight plan, but then subsequently, once airborne and in the national airspace, adjust that flight plan on the fly. That provides flexibility, responsiveness that they need, but also that is more likened to what you'd have with a manned aircraft. And so normalizing our ability to employ RPAs in the national airspace here at home is definitely improving. And then, as Tilt mentioned, it's a challenge that we have with any host nation as well that we need to work through.
And I assume that you're flying all those operations here in the national airspace as IFR instrument flight rules so that you have air traffic control providing the separation for the RPAs and other aircraft.
Exactly, Class A airspace.
Yeah, I was surprised, Reggie. I was down at Ellington Field down in Texas just a few months ago and got a mission brief from them. And they were sharing the hoops they had to jump through in order to operate in the national airspace. As, you know, something as arduous as when they took off, they had to have a chase plane to make sure that they were doing the see and avoid And that's arduous. I mean, that is a pain to have to do that every time you take off.
Yeah, definitely. And it's obvious to say, but you just can't look out the window like you can with
Yeah.
a manned aircraft. And so limited visibility there that is we're trying to overcome with some of these options.
Yeah, great work.
And I will just add in Colonel Pederson from the 432nd Wing that the Follow and Fly has been an outstanding addition, as we are currently this week flying in a weapon system evaluation program, where in the past we would have to go to the FAA at least 90 days prior with an approved flight route, and we'd give it to them. They would sit there and evaluate, and if they gave us permission, we could actually fly it. If not, we'd have to cancel. And so Follow and Fly allows us to basically just be treated like any other aviation asset. We still have to climb up in restricted airspace, but once we get above in 18,000 feet into the Class A, they treat us just like anybody else. And it's been amazing for our crews.
Well, that's great to hear, Fever. You can't say headquarters is doing nothing for you. Reggie's leading some important efforts here at the Pentagon.
Well, to take it a step further, as you brought up CCAs earlier, that adds another challenge there as you're working with autonomous aircraft.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Reggie, our two wing commanders have given us some tremendous success stories supporting combatant command operations. And we've been discussing these two units at length. But the U.S. Air Force has over 40 squadrons committed to RPA ops. Collectively, that's thousands of airmen flying these missions around the globe every day. And it's an amazing enterprise. Can you help us put this in perspective? What's the big picture, if you will?
Yeah, it's an amazing enterprise when you think about it. Absolutely. Refer to my opening statement there. And combatant commanders can't get enough. There's a huge appetite out there, and they want more, more, more. And as you heard both the wing commanders talk about, there's a lot of demands and stresses associated with that. I'm excited to hear that enterprise-wide manning has gotten better to allow the wings to deal with those stresses a little bit better. And they've taken a lot of other measures there to support the airmen. But you're right, the enterprise is huge. You know, whether it's the commands that Tilt and Fever lead to our total force capabilities, you have 14 states operating cockpits as well as dedicated remote aircraft out there. And then you have the education and development complex that produces our remotely piloted aircraft pilots and the sensor operators. So an incredible amount of talent, capability, and capacity that we have in our RPA enterprise. And any discussion of the future to include concepts of affordable mass or, as you mentioned earlier, collaborative combat aircraft, it needs to include the lessons we've learned over the last few decades in this community. That knowledge base and expertise resides in the very capable and professional RPA community.
But not all of the RPA units are in the active component, right? I mean, you've got some Guard and Reserve. Can you tell us what they bring to the fight for you?
An incredible amount. Yeah, as I mentioned, 14 states are operating, so referencing the Air National Guard, and they are just as capable and ready as our active duty compadres as well. So a lot of capability there in the states, and I'll let Fever and Tilt pile on there with their experiences working with the Air National Guard.
Outstanding. So I actually have two reserve squadrons on Creech Air Force Base here as part of the 432nd Wing and supporting our operations. And what they bring is continuity and experience. The greater MQ-9 community is still a relatively young community, so it's not uncommon to have lieutenants flying our downrange missions. And so what the reserve units bring is that kind of Iron Major, graybeard experience that our folks sometimes are lacking. And so we could not be as successful as a wing without the contributions from the reserves. And then I'll take it a step further with the Guard. They fly a significant number of combat lines daily, and it's always rotating around which of those 14 wings are actually flying the missions. But we could not force present MQ-9s at the same level that we do without the Air National Guard. And so both the Guard and the Reserve are hugely important to the overall RPA mission. And like I said, I don't think we'd be nearly as successful as a community without the Guard and Reserve component.
From Grand Forks, if you're in the great state of North Dakota, you can't talk North Dakota without talking the nuclear mission and the Air National Guard. And the Air National Guard relationship that we have with Fargo is very different than it is for Colonel Pederson and the MQ-9 Enterprise. In the Global Hawk community, we have no Guard or Reserve component. And so we look to the Guard, specifically the MQ-9 Enterprise, for a different type of relationship. Some of that is about integration and kill chain management and the things that we can learn as we pick up signals and absorb things through the various sensors that we have on our platform, and how to accelerate and expedite the kill chain, and do that in a peacetime homeland training environment through partnership with training elements and other Air National Guard elements like our friends down at Fargo, North Dakota, to learn about how you do kill chain management, cross-platform, integrate more effectively. And then we look to them for a lot of other unique training opportunities, to include hosting them here on Grand Forks Air Force Base for Agile combat employment exercises, Arctic training exercises that focus on looking towards the Northern Hemisphere. And so it's a very special relationship, and we try and use that as effectively as we can to maximize the learning for both the Global Hawk Enterprise, and then hopefully reciprocate with learning for the MQ-9 Enterprise.
Oh man, you guys are doing integration and kill web stuff. Like, that's a whole other podcast. We're going to have to talk about that later.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Tilt. And so many success stories that we've already gone over. And I think we can all agree that a lot of the success that we've talked about depends on the professionalism and the expertise that the RPA pilots have brought. And it's hard to believe that when this whole thing kicked off about 30 years ago, that the Air Force was non-volunteering all aircrew into this community. And then about 20 years ago, the Air Force made the decision to start an entirely new career field called the 18X, we call it within the Air Force, or RPA pilot. So now these individuals, these lieutenants, are trained from day one. They know they're going to be an RPA pilot. They go through a specific pipeline. And then once they complete that pipeline, they go either direct into the MQ-9, RQ-170, or the RQ-4. And let's be honest, scaling this career field back in the day there were some tough days. But give us an update right now of how you all think the career field's developing.
All right. Well, Colonel Pederson, I tell you, I think the creation of the 18X community, and those are those rated RPA officers, was the best thing that ever happened to the MQ-9. I'll be completely honest. There are officers like Till Monroe and myself, those who have brought their experience from other platforms. I think they were absolutely crucial to standing up the enterprise as fast as we did. I don't think there was any way we could grow it at the pace it needed to be grown for the demand signal without bringing in other aviators from other communities. But drawing from other communities was unsustainable. It was unsustainable to those communities, and I think it really put a crimp on what we could do with this platform, because we all came in with our kind of preconceived notions of how to operate things. Our young 18X officers have accomplished things in this aircraft that I had never dreamed of as a young captain. And I'll give you a perfect example. Leading missions during a red flag or a weapons school integration exercises, and those are some of the large force exercises that we accomplish. When I went to MQ-9 weapons school, and General Hammond can back this up, we were just figuring out how to use the MQ-9 and integrate it with other platforms. And we had to fight to be included in the large-scale missions and to have our role. But now I can go down to the weapons school and I can watch a young 18X officer, a captain, leading some of the most challenging dynamic targeting missions as a DT lead, something that I never dreamed possible when I went through just 10, 15 years ago. So I don't think we've ever gotten to that level of expertise without the homegrown 18X talent. And I'm really excited to see where they go in the future, because what we're generating here is a lot of aviators that are getting a lot of experience at a very young age. And so when they hit the point in their careers where they're ready to go be staff officers, they're going to bring a wealth of experience operating in different AORs under different combatant commands. And we're already starting to see that RPA folks who are going to staffs are having a huge impact on those staffs. So I'm excited to see what the future brings. I think 18X, homegrown 18X, was the best thing that ever happened to this community. Tilt?
That's great to hear. Thanks so much, Fever.
I joined the RPA business late in my career, and so it was really interesting to join a community and be in the middle of the conversation about culture and how a weapons system and the great Americans that are flying it, fixing it, projecting power with it can grab hold of an identity and turn it into something that is their own. And you go from those back office conversations that have to deal with what's the combat to crew ratio, and then the target and tactics and procedure development discussions with really smart weapons officers as the weapons school was being created and brought online. And it really is an amazing thing now, a decade and a half removed from my very first RPA flight, to see how all those things have congealed around a very powerful identity and community. And part of that is 18X, but an equally sizable piece is the identity of our maintainers and some of the work that the Air Force is doing right now to consolidate maintenance career fields so that people have the flexibility to take their skill sets from an RPA platform into the fighter community over to a mobility or bomber platform and be able to cross-pollinate that, because what starts in the RPA business, frankly, has the ability to change the culture and identity of the Air Force. And I think that we're going to continue to see that with the advent and onboarding of collaborative combat aircraft and other future RPA capabilities. But one other very brief point on identity. The other piece that's a really strong benefit to the way that we project power and the tools that we do that with is the fact that our professional airmen start to learn about other domains very early in their career. You have to know and be respectful of the cyber domain, the space domain, how those architectures flow together with one another. And if you get that stuff right, what you create is the exact future leader that's going to succeed in that multi-domain fight of the future, wherever it may occur, because that fight is going to happen. And so there is more and more of a turn to look at people that are part of the RPA enterprise because they can talk and communicate cross-culturally and understanding the complexities of the environment that we're operating in. A lot of that is a tangential benefit of the 18X community, but I think a lot of it is the visionary leaders that said this is an important type of technology that we need to have in the United States Air Force.
So, Tilt, I'm really glad you brought that up about that you're building an identity, because what you've done through the RPA community is more than just building a weapon system. You're building a new Air Force tribe, and that means the culture. It's everything from the codes, the beliefs, the values, which is all underpinned by the Air Force core values, as well as your TTPs and your training. But more than that, the RPA community has been able to evolve your mission. And this is about innovation. I mean, you guys started with the GOAT, right? The RQ-1, the Predator, and you became the RQ-4, the MQ-9, the RQ-170. You guys have really been creative and innovative in how you're investing in the technology and the TTPs to deliver what the combatant commander needs. And, if you're following defense news, a recent article highlighted that F-16s use laser-guided rockets to target aerial drones. So in the realm of innovation and evolving your mission set, are there plans for your platforms to target enemy drones? Are you looking at evolving to that in a mission area? Because that could be an important contributor to air superiority.
Yeah, Col Pederson from the 432nd Wing. So it's certainly within the realm of possibility, but it's not a mission we really have trained to, and not one that we are actively kind of working on.
Okay.
There are some huge technical challenges with acquiring a target that small and mobile with an MQ-9. So we have no onboard radar, and the camera, while it's phenomenal, it's kind of like looking through a soda straw. And so it's really good if we know where a target is and we can follow something once we've acquired it, but it's very difficult to find something that small and mobile. So it's certainly feasible, but it's not something with the current demand signal that we have from the command commanders that we're spending a lot of training time on.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, you've got some real world demands from the COCOMs that you need to be able to service as opposed to playing science project. It just seems like there's a lot of potential there to innovate on.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. First of all, let's definitely stop and highlight the successes that the Air Force has had here over the past year when it comes to countering some of these one-way UASs. One, I wish I could have been a part of it, and two, it's just some impressive work by our airmen. And that's across all services as well. Not to be lost that Navy and Army has a big part in that as well. But there's a critical cost imbalance that exists using expensive munitions against significantly cheaper threats that we definitely need to figure out. Fever knows better than I would, but there is some capability out there that if we could do it at a lesser cost but still be effective, MQ-9 may offer that from an air-to-air perspective. There are some attributes that I think the MQ-9 or an RPA might offer in that scenario, and that's going to be endurance. Long loiter times allow for continuous monitoring and rapid response. Sensor fusion, you've got great integration of various sensors that enable better detection and tracking of some of those targets. And then the capabilities, whether it's kinetic, non-kinetic. We need the MQ-9 specifically to be a truck is what I tell my staff.
I like that.
I need it to carry any munition that's compatible that the combatant commands might need, as well as any sensors that they may need, so that we offer a a la carte optionality for the combatant commanders to meet their needs in theater.
And the integration piece is huge too, because you could take off-board queuing to be able to do that.
Yep, definitely. A lot of capability, I think, specifically talking about the MQ-9 here. But I think there are some options there, but Fever hit it on the head there that there's a lot of other demands that...
Seems like every platform out there is high demand, low density.
Definitely.
Yeah, excellent point. Thanks a lot for bringing that up, Tilt. I want to keep the Global Hawk conversation moving forward. Tilt, if you wouldn't mind, as we mentioned earlier, the Global Hawk, it doesn't carry weapons, but it has some tremendous ISR sensors, flies higher than any other Air Force drone, and a lot of people don't realize it's much more automated than the MQ-9. Whereas the MQ-9 has a stick and a throttle and some autopilot modes, the RQ-4 doesn't even have a stick. You have to operate it completely by mouse and keyboard. Tilt, give us some insights into the challenges your folks face flying such an automated system, and how do you see this man-machine interface moving forward as automation becomes a real reality as we go on to CCA and then future platforms after that?
Well, I'll start with this, that, one of the challenges that we deal with operating the RQ-4 is the very cumbersome process that it takes to develop one of these highly automated flight plans. And for your listening audience, the airplane, while it is started in a very manual, labor-intensive way in close coordination between a pilot, a maintainer, and then a safety observer, after that, almost everything is executed at the click of a button. The taxi, the takeoff, the climb out, all of the points that an airplane flies to get to a combat theater and then its real world mission, all of those things are part of a very exhaustive pre-mission planning and a very labor intensive process that we go through to build a flight plan, have it vetted by our industry partner, which is Northrop Grumman, for lots of various safety measures. It's run through a system that validates that that flight plan is true, accurate, and safe before we even load it up to an airplane. And sometimes that process can take hours or days. So if you have a real time-sensitive issue that you need to address, you've got to have all of your partnerships on board to quickly turn things so that you can get where you need to. And that's especially challenging when we tie it back into the discussion on agile combat employment. As for the concepts of the user interface and automation going forward, it really does present some great opportunities, but some great challenges. I think we're learning a lot about trust in technology, how we bring an industry partner along for the requirements development process, how we procure things in a way that build in flexible thinking and logic so that they can partner effectively either through human-machine interface or machine-to-machine. And this really starts to get into the future of remotely piloted aircraft, whether that's something to replace the Global Hawk and the MQ-9, or as we've already talked to, the Collaborative Combat Aircraft, CCA for short, that the Air Force is on the verge of investing in very heavily. Because whether it's operated through intense man-in-the-loop management or man-on-the-loop management, we are still right in that really exciting window of being able to really open up incredible opportunities with high levels of automation that are able to go out to the very edge of the operating space, do thinking and high cognition tasks, and be able to execute at the speed of decision making to help the operator, the combatant commander, or whomever that commander may be, to inflect the decisive things that they need to in the battle space. So a really exciting part about our community and the direction that it's going.
So, Tilt, that's really exciting. And I like to pull the autonomy thread a little bit more because you've already begun thinking a lot about how your experiences with the Global Hawk's autonomy, how those might apply to the CCA and the challenges that community will need to overcome. How is the Air Force leveraging your experience within the RPA community to ensure that CCAs go down the right path?
So right now, the Air Force has stood up an experimental ops unit for CCAs. And I will tell you that there are key individuals in that first unit that are from the RPA community that have an 18X background. And so they're definitely, the Air Force, I thought, was very smart to include these individuals. And these are squadron level leadership type of positions to kind of harness their expertise. And so I'm not sure what the future CCA squadron will look like, but I'm really heartened to know that there are at least some 18X raised officers who are taking part of the first forays into the CCA world.
Yeah, just to pile on what Fever just mentioned there with the unit that they stood up there at Creech, we're doing similarly on the air staff. You need those RPA pilots who have the expertise, the knowledge base from decades of learning with semi-automation or the command and control aspect at the crewed, uncrewed teaming. They're the experts that we need to have in the mix to inform the way forward for CCAs. And the Air Force is doing that, and I think that's a good path to follow.
I will say that one of the things that I think Air Combat Command is getting right is that when the future concepts of CCA started to come on board, the individuals that were put into place to start working through those things operated in a division at Air Combat Command where they were with like-minded people, other remotely piloted aircraft experts. But after a period of time, they recognized that we can't just singularly be with people who think about problems the way that we do. We need to start to integrate early from the outset of design concepts, requirements development. And now I think that it's a really, really strong point of Air Combat Command leadership that the people involved in CCAs are literally sitting in the same workspaces with the people that are working on fighter platforms. And so those relationships are working on a symbiotic basis to start blending ideas, sharing best practices, and really challenging one another's thinking from a very early point to make sure that that influences the long-term success of CCA.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Tilt, because last summer when the NGAD was paused and undergoing review, there were a lot of people saying, hey, look, you don't need to have NGAD. This can all be unmanned. It can be all just CCA. You don't need to have that kind of penetrating platform. And as you know, here at Mitchell, we disagree with that approach. We don't think it's one or the other. We think we're better together, that when you leverage autonomy and CCA with a penetrating counter-air and that family of systems, that really is going to give you the maximum mission execution and lethality. So I'm really curious from your perspective, since you mentioned having RPA, CCA, and fighters all living together, how did that work? What were the attributes that you gain when thinking about not having the pilot in the cockpit?
Curious to know if General Hammond has some thoughts on that.
I was just going to pile on. I think you said you disagreed with the approach of
one or the other.
or
Yeah,
and I would take it a step further. It's not just CCA or NGAD. What's the objective? Are we talking about air superiority? Then in that case, yeah, I want CCA, I want NGAD, I want 4th gen, I want 5th gen, I want space, cyber, and I want my reconnaissance platforms all to be a part of it, to feed the picture and be able to target the picture. I think you need all those capabilities. I would love for the Air Force to have the budget to pursue all those as well. But I think there's a complementary, and in fact, I think you had in a recent podcast there as you were talking about the fighter pilot shortfall. We need the complementary capabilities associated with our manned, our unmanned, and our autonomous platforms out there to all be feeding the fight.
Yeah, no, thank you. It really is truly a layered effect in an integrated way that the Air Force approaches those mission sets. But to bring it back, it really was being discussed as a binary option, as opposed to how do we balance and create the right family of systems? And in a family of systems, you have to buy all of them. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
Hey, I'd like to get back to some combat operations talk.
Oh, there I was, the shooter watches.
So for our wing commanders, people often think of aircraft like the MQ-9 and the RQ-4, and they say they're irrelevant in the Pacific because of the high threat. However, I think we've had some exercises and some nuances of the operating environment that would suggest a far different reality. I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on how you think these platforms can be used in the Pacific. I think I heard Exercise Valiant Shield had some positive results back in 2022 and showed that there could be a very bright future for these aircraft. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yes, Slider, I think we have to recognize something, that there's a spectrum of competition and conflict. And so it's not just going to be the high threat. There is all of the competition that leads up to a conflict. There's the early stages of conflict, there's the late stages of conflict, and then there's whatever follows of conflict. And I think if you think about the MQ-9 specifically and what we've proven in EUCOM and in Indo-PACOM, is that there's definitely a role for us to play in most of those phases, and definitely in the competition phase, which we're executing now, and in potentially the early and the late stages of conflict. And so when you talk about things like preparation of the battle space, when you talk about being able to collect on an adversary, those are things that I definitely see a role for RPAs in the future, because we're executing some of that stuff right now. And so I don't think that it's a very good argument that there is no place for the MQ-9, because it is typically operated in a very permissive environment. I think there is a place for it, but I also don't overestimate the capabilities of the platform, because it was never designed for a large-scale major conflict to survive that. And that's okay too, but there's still definitely a role for it in some of the earlier phases.
And Fever, I think it's important to point out that, as you mentioned, the phases leading up to and immediately following major combat operations can be very long in duration. And that's when the MQ-9 and our long endurance aircraft really get good bang for the buck.
I would suggest, I think you alluded to it, Slider, there, that the multi-domain approach is key. If you put all your eggs in one basket, then the adversaries only have to target one basket. And so maintaining those capabilities in different domains is where we need to go. Obviously, space brings the advantages of persistence and access, and air has the advantages of proximity and dynamic response. And so the way we're going, we're investing in both. And that's the way we need to proceed.
Like General Hammond mentioned, there's a tendency to think about air and space as zero-sum games, that missions and resources that go to one side are taken from the other side. I don't think that's the case. I think they're very complementary. I think there are some things that space does very well and some things that air does very well, and I think we need to have both. And I think if we really want to give the combatant commanders the information that they need and the assets and the intelligence they need to solve the complex problems that they face, that we need both air and space assets in that theater. I would also say that we are absolutely reliant on space for our missions every single day. We have a really good partnership with the Space Force, and we are excited to see what new capabilities they are going to bring in the future, and then how we can use those to our advantage. So I don't think it as an air versus space, one or the other. I think of it as they increase their game, that we will see some benefits there, and we look forward to harnessing those benefits.
Well, I would ask you about those, but since it's tied to space, I think it might actually be like super duper classified. But I mean, really, in our mind here at Mitchell, we've got the RQ-4, we have the RQ-170, we've got the MQ-9. These are platforms we have within the inventory now, and they provide a very real need that combatant commanders can't get enough of. There's no reason why we shouldn't continue to maintain these platforms with the inventory as long as possible, even as we begin to develop some of those space-based capabilities. And then as space continues to develop and mature, how can we then leverage what space can bring to the unmanned systems?
I would suggest, though, also that we do have some very old aircraft. That's across our entire Air Force. And in order to pave the way for modernization, reference the U-2, which is scheduled to divest here in the very near future, you have to be able to rid yourself of those legacy platforms, regardless of the great work they've done for 5+ decades, in order to pave the way and make room for whether it's budget space or physical space to move forward.
I agree with you, and I would say don't give up the platform you have until another one is being delivered from the factory. It's got to be a one-for-one because we're already too small. The COCOMs can't get enough of the Air Force, and I've never seen a budget where divest to invest actually works. Really what just happens is you get smaller, you spin your platforms harder, and we just get older and the WSS just gets larger. So I agree with you, and we need to make sure that we maintain this mission capability, because if you give up the platforms before the next capability is on board, you've just created a mission gap. And as integrated and as dependent and interoperable as we all are, that creates a tremendous vulnerability. Houston, leave us on an up note. That was kind of a downer.
Okay, Lucky, I think I've got something for you. When I think back to my time in the community, in the RPA community, and I think about where it all started back in the 1990s, RQ-1 Predator. Let's talk about closing kill chains. I mean, who doesn't want to talk about closing kill chains? Well, back in the 90s, RQ-1 was finding targets all over the battle space, but because it was unarmed, was unable to close those kill chains in a timely manner. They tried to call in aircraft, the target would move, and the targets would escape. But then visionaries like General John Jumper said, hey, we need to arm this thing. We need to do it as soon as possible. And so under his leadership, as the Air Combat Command commander, they were able to arm this thing relatively quickly. And the warfighters, the RQ-1, which became the MQ-1, and then the Reaper pilots, came up with brand new tactics, techniques, and procedures that made this one of the most lethal platforms in the battle space. And they were closing kill chains like never before. So from a platform that couldn't even close a kill chain to then years later is able to precisely strike a single terrorist on a motorbike going through an urban environment with zero collateral damage and striking that individual from 10,000 miles away. Truly remarkable. And then when one hellfire wasn't enough, for our weapons officers to sit down and figure out, all right, the software is unable to support us in terms of weapons effects. We're going to figure out a way to get 4 Hellfire missiles to strike a single target within 1 second to get the weapons effects that we need. And the way they did that had nothing to do with technology. They got a kitchen timer. They brought in 4 kitchen timers, put 1 in each of the cockpits, and they did a 3-minute hack. And by doing that and coordinating their efforts, they were able to get the weapons effects they needed. This is a community that has grown so much over the years.
I'll go back to something General Hammond said earlier, which was, I believe the exact number was 2,200 aircrew, which is the largest MWS as far as rated aviation. And so I think about that, and I think about how far we've come as a community. So the very first sortie that I flew, we barely knew kind of what we were doing. And so, I've watched this community grow from 2 squadrons, 3 squadrons, 2 squadrons in FTU, so 3 total squadrons, up to where we are right now. I think the quote was 40 squadrons from across when you include AFSOC and Air National Guard squadrons and the reserve components as well. And so when you talk about a success story, I think of that. I think of growing in basically 1 generation. So in my career, from 3 squadrons to 40 squadrons. And the reason why is because of the effects that we bring to the combatant commanders. And so to be a part of that. I just feel grateful to have seen that, to kind of have gotten in on the ground floor and to be a part of this community where every single day I was having combat effects on the battlefield. And that was part of the reason that I made the decision to leave my previous platform and move to the MQ-1 and MQ-9 community full time, was because instead of training for 18, 24 months to go on a 4 or 6 month deployment, every single day we could be affecting the battlefield, taking bad guys off the chessboard. And so I'm just have been grateful and humbled to watch this MQ-9 community grow from its humble origins up to the kind of juggernaut it is right now. And then to see us kind of pivot, and when some of those questions about our viability in competition were being raised, to see us pivot and be incredibly successful as we move to competition against the adversaries in EUCOM and in the Indo-Pacific. I think that is our success story, to see how well we grew an entire in one generation, an entire community, and to see how awesome its effects are. So that's what I would like to close with.
Fever, I'm glad you brought that up, because when I was a baby fighter pilot and they were just standing up the RQ-1, all of us looked at it and were like, oh my gosh, what is that going to be able to do? But it's not just standing up the community, is that you're all of the RPA pilots, all the RPA operators, all of your maintainers, all of your air crew have built this mission area and built the 18X field through actual combat. You've got the receipts, you were dropping the bombs, you were killing the bad guys, you were doing that on a daily basis. And I got to tell you, that's got respect right here.
Yeah, and let's talk real quick about the evolution.
Yeah.
So in the late 90s, you had a line of sight aircraft. So the RQ-1 was unarmed, did not have a laser designator, and it could only fly about 150 miles away from the base. And the Air Force used it in Europe. And then between 1997 and now, going back to what you just said, Lucky, in terms of building that combat credibility.
On a daily basis.
But we went from not being able to even target an individual or a tank or anything in the battle space to we continued to evolve and didn't have the credibility to begin with because, as you said, didn't have the experience, but very quickly built that experience over the years. And by around 2010 to 2020, when we're in the heat of the global war on terrorism, now you had a platform in the MQ-9 that could fly. The aircrew were in the United States flying through advanced satellite communications around the world, and they were targeting single individuals in urban environments. And the expectation was that our aircrew were going to take out those high-value individuals with zero collateral damage. No Air Force in the world has ever been able to come close to doing that kind of capability.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. You definitely built up the street creds. And just like you rose and invented, I mean, really, that's what your community did, was invent that capability through the TTPs and the technologies and the training and the experienced air crew and how you work together as a team. I have every confidence that that's not the only problem set you guys will solve, that you will move into the future when we look at peer conflict and high-intensity conflict and still be relevant there. All right. Any final thoughts for our audience, gentlemen?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm just thank you again for letting me be a part of it, and huge respect for Tilt and Fever in their leadership roles in the RPA Enterprise. It's great to work with you and to be able to support you from afar here at the Pentagon. So just keep doing the great work that you're doing.
Gentlemen, it's great to see that our RPA community is in most capable hands. Thanks so much.
If I can pitch in just to tie something back on lineage, I'd be remiss in a discussion like this if I didn't highlight that one of the bright spots for the Global Hawk Enterprise has been the enlisted pilot program. In December of 2015, the Secretary of the Air Force directed integration of enlisted RPA pilots into the Global Hawk community. At the height of that program, there were 43 professional airmen that were executing the duties of piloting command for high altitude strategic capabilities. The program was discontinued a couple of years ago. And so from the height of 43 enlisted pilots, we have 12 remaining in the inventory. A bright spot for me and a good news story is that a number of those individuals have opted to participate in a program called RPA 2 bars. And so they have gone off to officer training school and come back, and now they are commissioned officers that are still operating the Global Hawk. And I think that that speaks to this connection that the young airmen that are being assessed into the Air Force today love the technology. They want to be a part of something, and that there is a different type of appeal to everybody that's joining the Air Force to be involved where they can contribute their skills and talents as best they are able to. The enlisted pilot program, I think, is a bright spot for the Global Hawk community. We have 12 left. All of them have different paths that they're going to take. And I think that it's important to call out the piece that they have contributed in the lineage to RPA aviation in the Air Force. It's great to have been with everybody. Certainly great to share a few minutes with General Hammond and Colonel Pederson. I hold them in very high esteem. Very, very reputable leaders in the Air Force, and certainly excited to see what it is that they go on to do next. This is my get off the stage experience with RPA Enterprise, 4 months left at Grand Forks Air Force Base, and then off to whatever it is the Air Force needs us to do next. And it's been a privilege to spend time with all of you, and thanks to the Mitchell Institute for hosting today's discussion.
Thank you. And Slider, thank you for bringing everyone together here. And for gentlemen, again, thank you for joining us. And please pass our best to everyone at Grand Forks, Creech, and of course, Air Force Headquarters and all the locations that your RPAs are flying out of.
All right, thank you. Since I didn't get a chance to do my closing yet, I just want to say thanks to the Mitchell Institute, to Slider and Lucky for the opportunity to speak to your audience today. What the MQ-9 and the greater RPA community do every day for national security is not well known, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about what it is that we do accomplish. And so thanks a lot, and always willing to come back on another podcast.
With that, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our guests for joining in today's discussion. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to you, our listeners, for your continued support and for tuning into today's show. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to hit that like button and follow or subscribe to the Aerospace Advantage. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you think about our show or areas you would like us to explore further. As always, you can join in on the conversation by following the Mitchell Institute on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can always find us at mitchellaerospacepower.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great aerospace power kind of day. See you next time.
Training program.
Yeah. So like you said, it's like 80 to 100 miles a day for 4 days.
Yeah, you
from
gotta
first
do it.
flight to like.
You gotta do it.
I'd be crying by like mid-morning.
General Goldfein is out there. If he can do it, you can do it.
Did you just call him a weenie?
The man had a tractor fall on top of him.
That's
and
true.
He's out
That's
there
true.
biking.
And then he's out there biking.
Now, I will tell you, amongst the small group, we did have General Alvin out there last year for the first
That's
time.
right. I remember that.
He did only the last day, which is still like 70 miles.
That's still manly.
So that's, it's strong effort.
Where's the starting point?
We start at Kitty Hawk.
Okay.
First flight.
And then
Very cool.
4 days end here at the
Memorial,
at
right?
the memorial, yeah. And
What is this event?
it leads up to AFA convention. So the Thursday through Sunday leading up to AFA in September. It's awesome. There's
Sunday, like 70 miles. I couldn't even walk the halls if I.
So I gave serious props to Alvin because there he is on a Sunday riding 70 miles. He's probably never done that before in his life. And then the next day he's given, a speech with no notes in front of, thousands of people.
And he's standing up straight and walking on the stage as if his legs don't hurt.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got to tell a horrible parent story, right? So kid number 2, the baby, we just took off her training wheels. So she has a single speed bike, and it's like the little 12-inch wheels, like the little tiny baby. This is not a serious bike. So we're like, we're going to celebrate this, and we're going to go do a bike ride. And Doug says, let's go over to the Eastern Shore where it's nice and flat. We got big, wide sides of the road, and we'll all ride from St. Michael's to Tillman Island and back. And I'm like, oh, sure, that sounds like a good idea. I have not mapped this out at all.
How far?
It's 13 and a half miles one way.
That's crazy.
So we take off, and Doug and my oldest are way ahead in front of us, and I'm hanging back with Emmy, and we're just pedaling along, and she's singing like, Muppet songs, moving right along, let's get this show on the road. Like, it's a great time. We get there, we have ice cream sandwiches. This kid just got her training wheels off that week.
She made it?
She made it all the way to Tillman Island, and she made it like 2 miles from the parking lot where the car was when she quit. She's like, big donkey brain guffawing. She was exhausted, tears streaming down her face. Of course, Doug's there like, you gotta go, pedal. And she didn't quit. She's still pedaling. She's just bawling her eyes out the last 2 miles.
I mean, that's hours.
It was an entire day.
Yeah, that's
It was
hours.
an entire day. So that is one of my many spectacular parenting fails.